The silk blouse slipped from Emily's shoulder at the exact moment the door opened. Time fractured. Her heart stopped, and Alexander Hale, the most powerful man in Manhattan, stepped into her world wearing a look that would haunt her dreams for weeks. 3 seconds earlier, she'd been invisible. Just another intern working late, stealing a moment to change clothes in what she thought was an empty office. 3 seconds later, she was standing half-dressed before a man who could destroy her career with a whisper. Emily's voice cracked as she clutched the blouse to her chest. I didn't think anyone would. The city can see you. His voice was velvet over steel, and it took her a moment to understand. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind her blazed with Manhattan's glittering skyline, and she'd been standing there like a display in a storefront. Heat flooded her cheeks. She wanted to disappear, to sink through the marble floor and never face another human being again. Instead, she found herself locked in Alexander's steel-gray gaze, watching something flicker behind his eyes that she couldn't name. Curiosity? Amusement? Something hungrier? He moved past her without a word, reached up, and pulled the blinds closed with one decisive motion. The harsh city light softened to a golden glow, transforming the sterile office into something intimate, dangerous. Do you always work this late? He asked, turning back to face her. Emily shook her head, still breathless. Tomorrow is important. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good. I like people who prepare. And then he was gone, leaving her standing there with her heart hammering against her ribs and one terrifying thought echoing in her mind. Everything just changed. Emily Hart had never planned to fall for a billionaire. She'd come to New York with $200 in her pocket, a business degree from Ohio State, and a bone-deep determination to prove that small-town girls could conquer Manhattan. She was the scholarship kid who'd lived on ramen noodles and worked 2 jobs just to graduate. She was nobody special. Alexander Hale was everything she wasn't. At 34, he'd built an empire that made other CEOs whisper his name with equal parts fear and envy. He was old money wrapped in new power, the kind of man who walked into rooms and made conversations stop. He had no family, no past anyone dared mention, and a heart locked tighter than Fort Knox. So why? Emily wondered as she lay awake that night. Had he looked at her like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve? The next morning brought the message that changed everything. Report to the executive floor, 7 p.m. Emily stared at her computer screen, pulse racing. Interns didn't go to the top floor. Ever. She almost convinced herself it was a mistake. Almost. But something in Alexander's eyes the night before, something that felt like recognition, like inevitability, pulled her toward that elevator at exactly 7 o'clock. The executive floor was a different world. Glass and steel and whispered power. Her footsteps echoed too loudly as she walked down the corridor, each click of her heels marking the distance between who she'd been 5 minutes ago and who she was about to become. Alexander stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the city skyline like a king surveying his kingdom. Miss Hart. He didn't turn around. Come in. Emily stepped inside, clutching her notebook like armor. You wanted to see me? You impressed me today. He turned slowly, his gaze catching hers. You work hard. You notice details. You don't ask for attention. But somehow she'd gotten it anyway. Why did you apply here? He asked. The question hung between them, loaded with something she couldn't identify. Emily hesitated, then chose honesty over diplomacy. Because I wanted to prove I could be more than small-town Emily. Something shifted in his expression. For a heartbeat. The mask slipped, and she saw something raw and recognizable. Hunger. Ambition. The desperate need to become someone else. I know what it's like, he said quietly. To want to prove something. The admission cracked something open. Between them, Emily felt it. The moment when two people recognize themselves in each other, when the careful walls everyone builds start to crumble. But before she could respond, Alexander's mask slammed back into place. That will be all for tonight. Thank you, Miss Hart? Emily nodded and fled, her mind reeling. She'd expected anger, dismissal, maybe a lecture about professionalism. She hadn't expected vulnerability. She hadn't expected to see herself reflected in the eyes of the most untouchable man in New York, and she definitely hadn't expected to want more. Over the next 2 weeks, Alexander found excuses to call her upstairs, a file that needed delivering, a presentation that required her input, a design element that needed a fresh perspective, as if her opinion mattered more than the 12 senior executives sitting around the conference table. Emily told herself it meant nothing. She was reading signals that weren't there, seeing patterns in coincidences. Men like Alexander Hale didn't notice girls like her, except he kept noticing. His messages appeared on her screen at odd hours. His voice would cut through meeting chatter to ask for her thoughts. His eyes would find hers across crowded rooms, holding her gaze just a second too long. And Emily, despite every rational thought screaming warnings, found herself falling. It started small, the way her pulse quickened when she saw his name, the way she began staying late, hoping for another summons to the top floor, the way she caught herself smoothing her hair before entering his office, as if it mattered, as if she mattered. "You're playing with fire," her roommate Sarah warned one evening, watching Emily pace their tiny apartment. "CEOs don't date interns, they collect them." "It's not like that," Emily protested, but the words felt hollow even to her. "Isn't it?" The man could buy and sell you 1,000 times over. What do you think happens when he gets bored?" Emily didn't have an answer. She only knew that when Alexander looked at her, she felt like she was finally becoming the person she'd always wanted to be. Confident, valued, seen. But Sarah's words planted seeds of doubt that would grow in the dark hours before dawn, when Emily lay awake wondering if she was living a fairy tale or walking toward a cliff. The answer came sooner than she expected. Sebastian Hale had his cousin's sharp features but none of his restraint. Where Alexander was controlled, Sebastian was calculating. Where Alexander was private, Sebastian collected secrets like trophies. And he'd been watching Emily with the patience of a spider waiting for a fly. "Miss Hart." His voice was silk over poison as he cornered her by the elevators. "Working late again?" Emily forced a professional smile. "Just finishing up, sir." Sebastian's gaze swept over her, lingering, in ways that made her skin crawl. "I see my cousin has taken quite an interest in you. Tell me, do you know Alexander's reputation with pretty interns?" The words hit like ice water. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." Sebastian stepped closer, and Emily caught the scent of expensive cologne and malice. "He collects them, you know, bright-eyed girls who think they're special. They last a few months, maybe longer if they're particularly entertaining. Then they disappear. New cities, new jobs, generous severance packages to ensure their silence." Emily's throat constricted. "That's not, he wouldn't he?" Sebastian's smile was razor-sharp. "My dear, naive little Emily, you really think a man like Alexander would choose someone like you? You're not a partner. You're a distraction. A pretty little secret to relieve the boredom of empire building." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Enjoy it while it lasts, but don't mistake it for love. Men like us don't fall for girls like you." Emily stumbled away, Sebastian's laughter following her into the elevator. The walls seemed to close in as she rode down, each floor marking her descent from whatever fantasy she'd been living. "Men like us don't fall for girls like you." The words echoed in her head as she walked home through streets that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Every gleaming storefront, Every luxury car, every person in designer clothes seemed to mock her delusions. What had she been thinking? She was Emily Hart from nowhere, Ohio, the girl who'd worn thrift store clothes to her high school graduation. Alexander was Manhattan royalty, born into a world where people like her were invisible unless they were useful or entertaining. That night, she made a decision that would haunt them both. Emily tried to pull back. She really did. She stopped volunteering for late shifts, kept her responses to Alexander's messages brief and professional, avoided eye contact in meetings, built walls around her heart, and reinforced them with Sebastian's poisonous words. You're not special. You're just convenient. But the heart, as Emily learned, doesn't listen to logic. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when she found Alexander alone in his office at midnight, head in his hands, looking more broken than any billionaire had the right to look. "Mr. Hale?" she asked softly from the doorway. He looked up, and Emily saw something that shattered every defense she'd built. Pain. Raw, honest, human pain. Emily. Her name was a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." He almost smiled. "Touché." For a long moment, they sat in silence. Then, without thinking, Emily said, "You look like you're carrying the whole world. Sometimes it feels that way." Alexander leaned back, eyes distant. "You know what they say about me? That I'm cold, calculated, untouchable." His gaze found hers. "But it's not true." Emily's heart clenched. She'd never seen him like this. Unguarded. Vulnerable. Human. Every wall she'd built crumbled in that instant. "You don't have to be untouchable," she whispered. "Not with me." Something shifted in Alexander's expression. "Do you know why I built this company?" Emily shook her head. "My father was brilliant, but reckless. He gambled away everything, our home, our name, our future. When he died, all we had left was shame and debt." His voice dropped. "I promised myself I'd rebuild from nothing, that no one would ever take anything from me again." Emily felt tears sting her eyes. Without thinking, she reached out and covered his hand with hers. Alexander froze. Then slowly, carefully, he turned his hand over and laced their fingers together. They sat like that in the golden darkness, two people who'd spent years building walls only to find them crumbling at first touch. "This is real," Emily thought desperately. Whatever Sebastian said, this is real, but reality, as she was about to learn, had sharp teeth. The photograph appeared on a Tuesday. Emily was grabbing coffee when her phone exploded with notifications. Her roommate's panicked voice cut through the morning chaos. "Em, you need to see this. Now." The image was grainy, but unmistakable. Emily and Alexander leaving the office building together, his hand on the small of her back, her face turned up toward his. The headline made her stomach drop. "Billionaire's Secret. Hale Industries. CEO spotted with mystery intern by noon." The story had metastasized across gossip blogs and business journals. Emily's name was everywhere, her life dissected by strangers, who painted her as everything from a gold digger to a naive victim. The comments were brutal. Classic pretty girl thinking she can sleep her way to the top. Poor thing doesn't realize she's just this month's entertainment. How long before he trades her in for a newer model? Emily's phone rang constantly. Reporters, bloggers, distant acquaintances suddenly interested in her story. She stopped answering after the fifth call, asking if she was pregnant. Meanwhile, Alexander's world exploded in meetings, emergency board sessions, panicked advisors demanding explanations, investors questioning his judgment, his mother flying in from the Hamptons with ice in her veins and disappointment in her eyes. Through it all, Emily waited for him to deny it, to protect his empire by sacrificing her reputation, to prove Sebastian right. Instead, Alexander called an emergency board meeting and spoke words that would echo through Manhattan's power corridors for months. I will not sacrifice someone I care about to protect appearances. If you believe loving her makes me weaker, you never understood what made me strong. Emily watched from the doorway as Alexander dismantled every objection with quiet fury, defending not just their relationship but her character, her intelligence, her worth. When it was over, when the board finally fell silent, he turned to her with a smile that said everything. We survived. For exactly 24 hours, Emily believed they had. Victoria Hale arrived like winter personified. Alexander's mother was everything Emily had feared, elegant, cold, and sharp enough to cut glass with a look. She summoned Emily to the Hale family's private club, a bastion of old money where the very air whispered of privilege and exclusion. "You're very pretty," Victoria said, her smile thin as a blade. "But pretty girls are common in this city." Emily felt like a child called to the principal's office. "Mrs. Hale, my son is not a man who can afford distractions." Victoria's voice cut through Emily's attempt at explanation. "He built an empire from ashes, clawed his way to the top through blood and precision. Do you think he can afford to throw it away for, what would you call this? Love?" The word dripped with disdain. "I don't want anything from him," Emily whispered. "I love him." Victoria's smile sharpened. "And that, my dear, is precisely why you're dangerous. Love makes men do foolish things. It makes them forget who they are, what they've built, what they owe to those who helped them rise." She leaned forward, and Emily caught the scent of expensive perfume and barely contained hostility. "I've seen what happens when my son cares too much. He breaks himself trying to save things that can't be saved. I won't let him do that again. Not for you. Not for anyone." The threat hung in the air like poison. Emily understood without words what was being offered. Walk away quietly, or watch Alexander's world burn. That night, Emily sat on her narrow bed in her shabby apartment, staring at the gap between her world and his. She thought about Alexander's dreams, his burdens, his relentless climb to the top. She thought about how hard he'd fought to stand where he stood, and she realized that sometimes loving someone means letting them go. The note she slipped under. His door was short. "I love you too much to be the reason you lose yourself." By morning, she was gone. Alexander searched for her like a man possessed. He called every number she'd ever given him, visited her old apartment, her favorite coffee shop, the library where she'd studied on weekends. He hired private investigators, checked hospital records, even called her hometown in Ohio. Emily Hart had vanished into the sprawling anonymity of New York City like morning mist. Meanwhile, his world stabilized. The board praised his renewed focus. Investors expressed relief at his return to form. Business magazines ran glowing profiles about his laser-sharp dedication to empire building. Victoria watched it all with satisfaction. "You see," she told him over dinner at the family estate, "I saved you from making a terrible mistake. That girl would have destroyed everything you've built." Alexander looked at his mother with eyes that had grown colder, sharper. "You think you saved me? You were the one who broke the only thing that made me feel alive." The words cut deeper than Victoria expected. She'd seen her son ruthless, calculating, even cruel, but she'd never seen him empty. "Alexander, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." He stood, straightening his cufflinks with mechanical precision. "You chose my empire over my happiness. I hope it was worth it." Months passed. Alexander conquered new markets, closed billion-dollar deals, graced magazine covers with his success. But the victories felt hollow, the achievements meaningless. He'd gained the whole world and lost the only thing that mattered. His mother, watching her son become a stranger, finally understood the price of her victory. She'd saved his empire by destroying his soul. Emily rebuilt herself in the shadows of Manhattan. She found work at a small nonprofit helping immigrants navigate legal paperwork. Invisible work that paid barely enough to survive, but fed something in her soul that Alexander's world had slowly starved. She rented a tiny room in Queens, rode the subway with people whose biggest concerns weren't stock prices but grocery bills. It should have felt like failure. Instead, it felt like breathing again. But late at night, when the city quieted and her defenses crumbled, Emily ached for him. She dreamed of steel-gray eyes and gentle hands, of quiet conversations in golden lamplight. She wondered if he thought about her, if he missed her, if he'd moved on to someone more suitable, someone who belonged in his world. She avoided business news, but Manhattan was small for people in power. She heard whispers. Alexander Hale had become even more ruthless, more untouchable. Some said he was dating a senator's daughter. Others claimed he'd sworn off relationships entirely. Emily told herself she was glad. This was what she'd wanted. Alexander. Free to build his empire without distraction. The fact that it felt like dying was irrelevant until the package arrived. No return address, no name. Just a small envelope with a note inside in handwriting she recognized like her own heartbeat. "I'm done pretending I can live without you. Meet me where it all began." Emily's hands shook as she read the words again and again. After 8 months of silence, he was reaching out. After 8 months of convinced herself she'd done the right thing, he was asking her to come back. But what? If Sebastian was right? What if Victoria was right? What if this was just loneliness, not love? There was only one way to find out. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending to another lifetime. Emily's reflection stared back from the polished doors. Older, maybe wiser, definitely more fragile than the girl who'd first made this journey. Her heart hammered as the numbers climbed, each floor bringing her closer to answers she wasn't sure she wanted. The doors opened. Alexander stood by the window, silhouetted against the city lights exactly as he'd been that first night. For a moment, neither moved. Then he turned, and Emily saw 8 months of loneliness etched in his face. "You came," he said simply. "You asked." He crossed the room slowly, stopping close enough for her to feel his warmth, but not close enough to touch. "I tried to let you go. I told myself it was the right thing, that you'd be better off without the chaos of my world." His voice roughened. "But every day without you felt like losing a piece of myself." Emily's eyes burned. "I left because I thought I was saving you. Your mother, Sebastian, everyone said I was a distraction, that I'd destroy everything you'd built. They were wrong." Alexander reached up, cupping her face with hands that trembled slightly. "You never weighed me down, Emily. You were the only thing that made all of this feel like it mattered." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I'm scared. Nothing's changed. I'm still nobody from nowhere, and you're still... I'm still... A man who spent 8 months learning that power without you is just expensive loneliness." His thumb brushed across her cheek. "I don't care what they say. I don't care what it costs. I'd rather be nobody with you than a king without you." Emily opened her eyes, seeing truth blazing in his gaze. Not the careful truth of boardrooms and negotiations, but the raw, desperate truth of a man who'd found the one thing money couldn't buy. "Then let's stop running," she whispered. Alexander smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since that night 8 months ago. "No more running." They didn't have a fairy tale ending. Fairy tales are for children, and love is for adults willing to fight for it. The society pages still whispered. Alexander's mother still disapproved. Sebastian still plotted from the sidelines, waiting for cracks to appear. Business rivals looked for weakness. Gossip columnists hunted for scandal, and the world watched, with fascination and skepticism. Emily and Alexander learned to navigate it together. They faced down board meetings and charity galas, family dinners and media speculation. They learned that love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your world. It's about choosing to build a new world together. Alexander taught Emily that she didn't need to shrink herself to fit into his life. Emily taught Alexander that strength wasn't about being untouchable, it was about being vulnerable with the right person. 1 year later, they stood on the balcony of their penthouse, the city spreading out below them like a constellation of possibilities. Emily wore his ring, not because he'd bought her, but because they'd chosen each other despite every reason not to. "Any regrets?" Alexander asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Emily leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and sure against her spine. Below them, Manhattan pulsed with life, millions of people chasing. Dreams, building empires, falling in love, breaking apart, starting over. "Just one," she said. Alexander tensed. "What's that?" Emily smiled, covering his hands with hers. "I wish I'd met you sooner." He laughed, the sound rich and warm in the cool evening air. "We found each other when we were ready. That's what matters." And in that moment, surrounded by the city that had tried to break them apart, Emily understood the most important truth of all. Love isn't about belonging to someone else's world. It's about having the courage to create a world where you belong together. The city glittered around them, full of sharp edges and beautiful dangers. But Emily wasn't afraid anymore. She'd learned that the most powerful thing in Manhattan wasn't money or influence or family names. It was two people choosing each other again and again, despite everything the world could throw at them. And that was worth any price. The end.